So the event is organised by GILT, which is the Games and International Law Teaching Network that was set up last year by Sarah Thin at Nijmegen, who I can see is online, Sally, Rebecca Sutton from Glasgow University, who I understand is going to be online. I'm not sure if she is yet, but she is joining us, and me. So I'm an Associate Professor of International Humanitarian Law and International Human Rights Law at the Netherlands Institute of Human Rights at Utrecht University. Rebecca, who, as I said, I think is going to be online with her very little one, who's just over a month old and joining us today, organised the first GILT Network event last November, which was on escape rooms in education. And the recording of that event is online and can be found on YouTube. I think, Helen, you took part in that as well. So I also want to thank Lanes before I start, who's the student assistant at the Netherlands Institute of Human Rights, who has set up the event and made that nice poster that you'll have seen. So today's event is on board games and education. This is a topic that I'm really interested in learning more about. A few years ago, I designed a snakes and ladders game based around international humanitarian law. I used it in my classroom and it was such a success. It was so great. The students just loved to be sitting in small groups with board games, throwing the dice and working around the game. I'm not presenting it today because it was really so simple compared to the fantastic games that we are going to hear about, that I thought I'd give more space to the games that we are going to hear about. But if anyone wants to learn a bit more about how I transform snakes and ladders, you can ask me in the questions. What I loved about it was the way in which it sort of transformed the classroom into this playful space where the students were interacting with each other. We've got 4 fantastic speakers today, and they're going to be presenting 4 really impressive and inspiring games. We were supposed to have 5, but Frederick de Dam, who was going to be presenting his game, which is called Awesome Academics, is apparently stuck on a train somewhere between Amsterdam and Berlin. So that's a pity, because I think we all need a game called Awesome Academics. So the 4 that we do have, I'm going to introduce. I want to start by thanking them all so much for being here and for their willingness to take part in this event today. I'm going to introduce them in the order which they're listed in the programme and the order that I'm going to ask them to speak afterwards. So I'm going to start with Helen. So Dr. Helen Hall is an associate professor at Nottingham Law School with teaching responsibilities in tort, contract and family law. She's the Associate Director of the Centre for Rights and Justice. Together with Tom Lewis, she developed A Brave New World, which is a fun, accessible take on the legal principles of human rights. The game invites players to adopt either a majority or a minority character in a fantasy world. I'm going to let her tell us a little bit more about her game herself. Then I'm going to move to Professor Jane Mair from Glasgow University. She's a professor of private law, focusing on employment law and family law. And together with Felicity Belton and Frankie McCarthy, she developed a board game, Legally Wed, that's intended to chart the legal and social processes involved in becoming legally wed in Scotland. And it's intended as a fun way of exploring the legal underpinnings of the marriage contract. So again, we're going to hear more from Jane about her game. And then I'm going to move on to Jan, who's the only non-lawyer here. So Jan Grzymski, who's an academic who has worked both in Poland and the UK in European politics, borders and identity. And he's always been passionate about teaching, engaging students in critical discussions and innovative ways to experience and understand European politics. And in 2019, he designed a class simulation for students who were getting lost in understanding the final phase of the Brexit negotiations. I think they weren't the only ones who were getting lost in that. And you went on to developing what is a very professional board game now about Brexit, and it's called How to Win Brexit. So Jan, you're going to tell us more about your game. And then last but not least, I'm going to introduce my direct colleague, Dr. Malgorzata Kozak, who's a colleague in the International European Law Department here at Utrecht University, where she teaches European Union law and European competition law. And she recently transformed the Monopoly board in her classes to teach competition law. So she took the Monopoly game and she changed it so that instead of streets, there were all different kinds of industries, the food industry, sports industry, clothes producers, and some more. So we're going to hear from her about how she did that. So we've got an hour-and-a-half session. We've got these 4 amazing games. And what I think we'll start with is just moving in the order that I mentioned. And I've asked the speakers to share in 10 minutes some insights on these questions. So what caused them to develop the game? A little bit about how their game works. I'm also interested in what they were trying to teach with the game. You know, I think these are all educational games. So what was it that they were intended to teach? We're really hoping that this workshop will have an inspirational value. So for people who are attending and thinking, oh, I'd love to make a game, I think it's really interesting to hear from our speakers about the challenges they encountered when designing or even producing the game, for those of you who've really produced one in quite a professional way. And then lastly, I think it's also very interesting to hear how the students experienced the game. You know, did they enjoy it? Was it a success in terms of the learning goals, these kinds of things? So those are the questions, though feel free to cover anything that I may have forgotten in those questions. And Helen, I'm going to start with you. So thank you for being here, and over to you.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thanks to you for organising it. Organising any event with a group of academics is never wholly straightforward. So I really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to hear what everyone's got to say. So I'm going to be talking about a game that I developed with a colleague here at Nottingham Trent University, Professor Tom Lewis, and also a colleague at the University of Manchester, Javier Garcia Oliva. And as to what our initial inspiration was, some of it really came from a bit of frustration with the contrast between the enthusiasm and engagement that students would sometimes show outside of a classroom environment when they were asked questions about human rights or politics and social questions. And then suddenly they get into a seminar room and they're like little hermit crabs and they just like pull back into their shells. And I think I particularly found teaching quite frustrating in those circumstances. The students weren't keen to talk. I would get frustrated, and then the more frustrated I got, the less the students were keen to talk because they now had a grumpy professor on top of everything else. So it was what I'm doing isn't working. How can I therefore do something differently? And also it came from colleagues had for a long while been talking about introducing public law, actually, with a sort of island scenario. So you're a population on an island. What rules would you like to have to try and make sure that you have a reasonably tolerable coexistence, at least? So we took this basic idea about an island, but we decided that it wasn't going to have a human population. We decided that the island was going to be inhabited by goblins. There was no other politically active life on the island previously. So a group of goblins go to a desert island. However, the goblins go with all of their preconceptions and social prejudices from their former world. And this is important. So the nature and the mechanics of the game are relatively simple. Essentially, you shake a dice at the start of the game, and whoever gets the highest will be the first leader of this goblin settlement. And you are invited to pick one. You must pick at least one, but no more than one, from a list of high law. So laws that have the equivalent of constitutional level force. And you pick this, and then, and only then, you get to turn over your character cards, because everybody has been allocated at random a character in this society. And it's really important that at the moment you're choosing, though, the High Law as the first leader, you know nothing about who you are. So anyone who studied rules, it's a kind of, reflection of that kind of Rawlsian philosophy. And some of the rules are designed to benefit the leader. So you can tax the other goblins if you want to be oppressive. Sometimes, however, you might want to be benevolent. You might want to have some kind of equality law in place, either to protect gender or to protect the purple goblins, because in this society, one, the goblins are patriarchal, unfortunately, and two, the goblins, green goblins are in the majority, purples are the minority, and purples are systemically maltreated, essentially. So you can either pick a law which might do something about that, or you can pick a law which is self-interested. It's really important to get across to the players, though, that their objective is to win as their individual goblin. So you're not trying to show what a lovely person you are, you're trying to win the game. The game proceeds. Really simple, like lots of games you probably played as a child. You go around a little board, and there are different stations on the board. So there's a village, there's a healer's hut, a waterfall, some sacred stones, and a trading hut. Now, depending on what's on your character card, different things in life make you happy. So some goblins are sociable, so they like being in the village and socializing. Some of them have fleas, so they can't wait to get to the healer's hut to get some flea powder so they can stop scratching themselves. But you pick up happiness tokens when you pass by the stations on the board. However, as you also go around the board, there are some red squares that you might land on. And when you land on the red squares, a law is made. And whether or not that law remains in force depends on whether or not it works with whatever constitutional law you've chosen. Obviously, it's up to the players as well to pay attention. So if a law is not going to suit your purposes, then if you're smart, you're going to be thinking, well, is this actually currently enforceable? And it carries on like that. Now, obviously, you can imagine that if somebody has chosen an oppressive high law, this is going to cause issues. If you're a purple female goblin, you're really in trouble if there's no kind of equality law in position. However, it would teach very little if you just carried on like this indefinitely, because there's a mechanism to have revolution. So if enough goblins are dissatisfied, they can decide on their turn, right, I'm going to declare revolution, who's going to join me? Outcome of the revolution depends on the shake of a dice, but the more people are dissatisfied, the higher the number the goblin leader has to shake in order to survive, basically. So just like in human society, the more unpopular the regime is, the harder it is to survive. And essentially gameplay carries on like this. The object of the game is to collect as many happiness tokens as you can and to fill your card of happiness tokens. But the players are really left to work out their own strategy. And the mechanics of the game really work in terms of, if everybody is just constantly trying to put one over on everyone else, you'll just have revolution all the time and carnage. And nobody really can actually get on and collect their happiness tokens. So ultimately, hopefully, the players discover that having a just rule of law and having some equality and, well, goblin rights law in place actually is not something which somehow benefits the people that we might somehow feel sorry for or consider as marginalized. Actually, this is for everyone. Everybody needs to have a fair rule of law and human rights law. So that's really the message that the game is intended to convey. However, part of the reason we set it up like that is this isn't really preached at you. So you experientially find out, you get to experiment, you get to treat other goblins how you treat them, they respond. And there's obviously some quite nice human interaction, especially around the revolution, because you then get some horse trading. So someone says, right, I'm declaring revolution, who's going to join me? And then the other players tend to say, well, if I do join you, what high law are you going to pick then? How's that going to work for my interests? So you get that sort of political negotiation. One of the things we liked about it, therefore, was it wasn't preachy. It wasn't telling people what they should think. It was letting them decide what they should think and feel for themselves. In terms of how the teaching works as well, a really nice thing about it is that the teaching and the reflection, because it really does need to happen in the context of reflection afterwards, can be tailored to your audience. So we primarily started playing this with undergraduates, and we got some really positive feedback. They liked it. And they got it, they got the links, and in the discussion afterwards, they were able to, you know, draw it back to human society and politics and constitutions, and indeed international law. But equally, we've taken it out to certain public engagement events and had just, you know, random people who are curious about what we did in law school. We've also played in schools, even in primary schools. Obviously, the nature of the reflection is quite different if you're playing with a group of 10-year-olds and if you're playing with a group of undergraduates, or even we've had in times practicing lawyers. But the game is flexible enough as a resource to get people thinking about the rule of law, about human rights and about justice. And then really what you do with that when you know, got it started, that's up to the person. One thing we have noticed about it, as I say, the reflections are quite key. So we're now working on some materials to try and help support other people who might want to use the game, because it's obviously fine while Tom, Javier or me are there playing. But we've got some sort of suggestions as to how other people might want to use it in their context to help to support them. But equally, as I say, it's quite a flexible game, and therefore people might want to use it in their own context and use it in slightly different ways. And that's absolutely fine. If it's getting people thinking about law and about social justice in a positive way, then we're really enthusiastic about that. And that's just about my 10 minutes up, so I will park it for there, but I would be really happy to answer any questions and really interested to hear what everyone else has got to say.
Thanks, Helen. And yeah, I would love to hear a bit later on about how you produced it and that kind of thing, but it's kind of you to pass it on for the moment. So Jane, you're next. Legally Wed, where did this come from and how did you go about it? Be lovely to hear from you.
Thanks. I've got a few slides which I'm going to try to share if that works.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Can't quite work out how to do the. Hopefully you can see that. Anyway, so where it came from, different from what Helen has just described, in that our audience was principally the public and not law students. So that's where that's what interested us and where we started. And I think what caused us to develop it, and I started off working with a colleague, Frankie McCarthy. Frankie and I have taught family law together for a long time. Felicity is a more junior colleague who joined us more recently, but we all teach family law together. And Frankie and I in particular have for a long time talked about you know, just the obvious. Family law is so fundamentally important to everybody, really, in whatever different form. And yet, as time and time again becomes clear, people often do not know what family law says or what the rules are. So our idea for a long time had been to think about public engagement and public legal education. So that's the background, and Felicity came up with the phrase law by stealth, and that was really it. That idea of people playing, families playing around board game, happy families, the really basic kinds of games that families might play together. But actually at the time they could be learning as well. So that's where it started. Frankie and I started off in one of these sort of festivals of social science many years ago, where we foolishly said, oh yes, we'll take part in that, and then thought, what are we going to do? And we came up with this thing called the game of love, which was a really, really basic idea. That's the game of love there. It was this kind of tombola machine where you turned the handle. It had lots of bits of paper inside. You turned the handle, it was a lucky dip, you picked it out. And the basic idea was that you would be either married or cohabiting when that's the card you would get. And the idea really was to get across to people that played the game that the legal rules really mattered. And there might be many reasons why they chose to marry or to cohabit, but the legal rules were a kind of key part of that, and that often they didn't know what those rules were. So that's where we started off with the game of love. And that was all great fun, and it turned out that we were right, that people often didn't know the rules, and also that they were really, really interested. Once you got their engagement, once you got their interest, they really wanted to know more. So what happened next was that in our university there was one of these kind of seed corn funding opportunities, and I'm terrible at having good ideas and saying, oh yeah, let's do that, let's apply for that, let's fill in that form. So we filled in the form, we asked for a ridiculously small amount of money because that's what was on offer. We really had no idea what we were going to do with that money, although that's not what we said in the form, and we had absolutely no idea how much it might cost to make a game. But you know, on a Friday afternoon we filled in the form and said we want to create a game which is going to be called Legally Wed, which is going to be principally about public legal education, but also through time thinking about how it might be used with law students. And the idea behind it really was that we thought, and we knew through our research, that there was a huge gap, or there were kind of two different things. There was the getting married, there was weddings. And weddings in Scotland, there's been a lot of change in the law. The law of weddings is a big thing, and weddings Scotland is opened up to the world as a place to come and get married, because it's very easy to have a wedding in Scotland, and there's a huge amount of choice. But we thought there's a big difference between the law of weddings and the law of marriage. And we think there's a kind of mismatch, disconnect between what people think about when they think about a wedding and what the legal consequences are. So that was the basic idea that lies behind Legally Wed. So we filled in the form, and I said, oh, don't worry. I said to Frankie and Felicity, don't worry, we'll never get it. And then, of course, we got the money. And we had a very, very short period of time in which to spend this money. So there was then a bit of panic, and we thought, oh goodness, what do we do? How are we going to make this game? And I can remember we got a bit desperate, and we thought, right, okay, we'll just get the paper and the coloured pencils, and we'll just come up with something, which is what we did, and we had great fun. And we improvised with our drawing tools, and we basically came up with our game design. A very simple idea. We decided, we talked about it, there were lots of ideas of more complicated, perhaps the slightly more dark side of family law, which we could have developed, but we thought, right, okay, we want this to be a fun game. Let's go for the, on the face of it, happy bit. Let's go for the weddings. And we came up with our design. And then we were incredibly lucky through just, you know, connections and one of those lucky moments that we got in touch with a local design studio. And we went along to them and we presented it as, you know, oh, we're completely mad. We've got this tiny amount of money and, you know, but we've got this really big idea. And fortunately, they liked it and they worked with us and they were just amazing. And they helped us to change our embarrassing drawings into our board game. And this is basically Legally Wed. Very, very simple idea. And Katharine, you said at the beginning your game is very simple. Our game is very simple. It's really about throwing the dice, moving around the board, and it's about there are different categories. There are 4 sets of cards which sit on these different circles on the game. And as you'll see here, there are 4 different sets of cards. There are capacity, consent, and ceremony, because those are the 3 categories of legal rules that apply. So to have a legally binding marriage, you need to comply with the rules in capacity, consent, and ceremony. And we had a 4th set of cards, which are calamity. And those calamity cards are all to do with the other bits of weddings, the bits that have no legal consequences at all, but they're the bits that people might choose to make their wedding the way they want it to be. And so the idea is you move around the board If you land on one of the coloured squares, one of the coloured circles, you have to pick a relevant card, and then you just have to follow whatever the instructions are on that. We have a fifth category of cards, which are compromised cards, and each player is given a number of compromised cards at the beginning. And the idea is that you can compromise on the calamities, but you cannot compromise on the legal rules. And that was the idea, that at various points they can choose to play one of their compromised cards. So if they have a calamity like, I don't know, the shoes are the wrong size, or the catering doesn't turn up, or flowers don't arrive, or whatever it might be, and there's a huge range of scenarios in the calamity cards, then they can choose to play their compromise card. And it doesn't mean because the calamities usually mean that you miss a turn, or you miss 2 turns, or you have to move backwards. So they can choose to play their compromise cards. But the point we're trying to get across is that these are social decisions, these are personal decisions about the way you want your wedding to be. But actually they have no legal consequences. So if you can live with compromise, that's absolutely fine from a legal perspective. So that's basically how it works. You get to the gold box here, and you have to throw a 6 at that point before you can walk up or walk down the aisle to the final destination when you are legally wed. And as you can see, that walking down the aisle is particularly troublesome because there's hardly a clear space there. And the winner is simply the person who gets to be legally wed first. So that's it. It's a really, really simple game, which is designed to be played by really pretty much any age of player. And the rules are pretty simple, and it is just getting around the board. But hopefully along the way you are doing a bit of learning law by stealth by reading the capacity, consent and ceremony cards. And they have a bit of information, but not too much. We're trying to get across, the key points about what the rules are in Scotland without going into too much detail, and to keep it hopefully accessible by the different categories who might play it. Since we made the game, we have tested it out with lots of different players. We organised quite a lot of playing sessions ourselves. We launched the game. We're very lucky in the university. The university chapel is just opposite the law school, and the university chapel is a very, very popular place for weddings to take place. And part of the inspiration, I have to admit, comes because my office is opposite it, and I have spent many a happy summer afternoon distracted by looking out the window, watching these wedding parties come and go. So it seemed to us absolutely perfect. And we had an incredibly supportive and accommodating university chaplain who was totally up for the idea that we would launch this game in the university chapel. So we did that. We had lots of people came to play the game that afternoon. We have sent it out to various local schools. They've played, some school pupils came along and played the game here. We've played it with students, we played it with colleagues. So we've done lots of different testing. And then a few years ago, the University of Glasgow was involved in a project, which I know Helen's game was also part of, Aspect, which was an attempt to get some more testing of these games. And so through that, our game was tested again in different contexts. And this was a report that came out just at the end of 2022 on the findings from the experience of testing the game. And just to finish up with, these were, it was really helpful. I mean, I think Aspect, they had about 40 different players who played the game in different ways. And that included other academics, it included just general members of the public, it included people that are interested in games and games testers, it included a couple of commercial games designers. It involved Scottish people and lots of visiting people too, tourists just in Glasgow. So it was quite a wide range of different people who played, children and adults. And we got lots of good feedback from that. But these were just kind of key points. And I think so we were absolutely delighted about this, because what we wanted this game to do was to help to inform people about the laws of marriage and what it took to get married in Scotland. And I think we got 100% response to the effect that it had worked to that extent, that everybody said their knowledge of Scottish wedding law had improved. It got them thinking about issues that they hadn't thought about before. It had increased their understanding of wedding law in relation to also the idea of what it meant to be married. So to that extent, we were really, really pleased, because it had done what we wanted it to do, and it got people talking. It got them talking about lots of different things about wedding law and about marriage. So that's where we are now. I said our intention was not. Our intention was always this would be part of public legal education. This year, this coming academic session, we're going to use it for the first time with some of our students as well. We've played it with students, but we're going to use it in a class setting as well. And we're going to use it in one of our honours courses, so a fourth year course on issues of family law. And we're going to use it as a sort of revision. So because students will have studied family law in the first year and now they're in their fourth year. We've also got some students who won't have studied Scots family law but are in our fourth year class. So those could be visiting students from other jurisdictions. So we're going to use it as a bit of an icebreaker early on, just to get everyone talking and engaged, but also as a bit of a revision tool to remind people of what the rules are on marriage law in Scotland. So I'm looking forward to that, because that will be a new experience for us and will give us a bit more thinking on where to go with it next. So I think I've probably got to the end of my 10 minutes and hopefully addressed most of the questions, but thank you.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much. I want to play them. Okay, let's move on before we open it up for questions. And now we move to you, Jan, for your How to Win Brexit game, which I know you actually brought to Utrecht not so long ago, but we missed each other. Sorry about that.
Yes, well, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me properly? Well, it's been a great honor to be invited here, and I'm very happy to share my experience with using board games, designing board games, and using board games. Even though I'm not a lawyer, as you mentioned, but I think we all aim actually the same problems in education, whether it's law, whether it's politics, European politics, and that's obviously is how to help people experience very complex issues. And board games are actually very useful tool for that. I have a short presentation, so I'll just share the screen. And I'll just... Okay, that's... should be able to see now. Yes?
Yeah, you may want to launch it. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
So the game which I design is called How to Win Brexit. It's a strategic role-play political board game. And basically the game rationale is to simulate the Brexit negotiations. So we go back into 2017 for 2 years of negotiations within the time of the game, which is 70 minutes, between 70 and 90 minutes. What I wanted to achieve by this game is to see how players can experience a polarization, political polarization, and negotiation within political polarization. Obviously, we all live in a very turbulent times, and we've just had European Parliament election. We see that polarization is rising, political polarization is rising. So I thought that the format of the Brexit negotiations themselves, like the original one, was a very useful in a sense to achieve the goal of helping people experiencing political polarization and negotiation with that. So obviously, I'm not advocating any side of Brexit negotiation, and that obviously there's some emotions involved in a Brexit itself. But in a way, it's a very unique political negotiations. Firstly, because it was never before there was negotiations like that. Secondly, the whole format, so Article 50 setting of Lisbon Treaty setting 2 years for this time, so very, very short time for the very complex issues. But at the same time, politically, you had two conflicting sides, very little common ground. But at the end, there's still some sort of necessity to get an agreement, because obviously we know that there was on table no deal option for the Brexit negotiations. But in the end, it was much worse, and both sides knew that it would be much worse than having an agreement. So in that sense, I thought that this format is very good to help people understand and learn about this kind of complex political negotiation, but at the same time to address things which all politics in Europe actually face, which is polarization and populist or liberal and illiberal forces in politics. So the game actually, the purpose of the game is to replicate the dynamic of the real life Brexit negotiations. So while I was testing the game, or now when I play this and people can see the game, a lot of people ask me whether I used some or refer to some existing gameplays. So the answer is no, and I did it deliberately. So I wanted to, while designing the game, I wanted to replicate this dynamic of the Brexit negotiations. So in that sense, it is quite a unique game, and it has pros and cons, which actually refers to the fact that a lot of people actually like playing games which they already played, in a sense that, you know, they know the rules, they understand, they don't have, the entry point is much easier for them. But at the same time, so this is obviously this is a challenge, but at the same time, when this entry point is overcome, then it's really rewarding for everyone to see that you know, you learn something different, and it's closer to the political life which people can observe and see, right? So the educational aspect of the game is that I wanted to question the concept of victory in polarization. And that's why I call this game How to Win Brexit. While I was presenting the game or promoting the game, there were some people saying, well, this is a game when you cannot win. And some people challenged me, why do I pose this, knowing how catastrophic the Brexit was. Once again, I put aside, which was very difficult, all this emotional aspect, political aspect, for which many people have a very, very strong opinion about. But at the same time, I wanted to deliberately question this concept of victory in a polarization, because we know that we see this, political actors or populists, and also now the other side, they have to offer the public easy solutions, which they can resolve problems immediately. And actually, the game is designed in a way that in the end, it's a question of interpretation and the post-game discussion. What is a victory? Because in the game, you can play, follow your individual tactic, team tactic, or team interests, and then you can sacrifice all this for the final agreement. But even if you get a final agreement, when you look what you have negotiated, is this a victory? Is this beneficial? And how do we set a criteria of victory in politics? Because obviously we're accustomed to victory in a sense that, you know, you can win the elections, or you promise something to people, let's get Brexit done. And then there is some result which can be a question also of interpretation. So this is the rationale of the game and the purpose of the game. Now, very quickly about the game development. As Katharine mentioned, it actually started with a simple class simulation, because I was teaching, and my entire academic career, I'm teaching European studies and international relations, mostly in English programs, double degree programs. So that was, and actually at that time, I was teaching with the program which has double degree with the UK University. So that was really some sort of challenge for me to explain students, what's going on in the early 2019. With ratification, votings, and interest, and all the graphs. British go left, this happens. If they go right, that happens. So in the end, I decided to have this this role-play simulation. So I printed the roles, and it was the first idea I thought about the game mechanics, and that went very, very, very well. And then some people started encouraging me. Well, maybe you can do something more with that. And with a little help of my brother and my own investment, we decided to try to turn this into a bit more professional, a fully fledged board game. Maybe in the discussion, we can come back to the question why I didn't want to do this through the university. I had the whole rationale for that, but it was my deliberate choice actually to go independent, basically to have some sort of autonomy how to design this and how to use this. I mean, it was never meant to be like a commercial enterprise, but at the same time, I learned a lot about the production and also funding and how to work with the graphic designers. It was a very, very I'll say challenging process. It was for sure one of the most challenging issues I've done in my professional life. So I started testing since October 21, so after the pandemic, and I went through. I went to many universities, but not only. Also to some gaming events, simulations, also to alongside Model European Union events. I tested this with the participants of MEU events, but also some public events or the public like citizen events when people can see the educational aspect of that. So I decided to do a Kickstarter, which is a crowdfunding platform. I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with that, but the idea is that you set the project, you set the funding goal, and at that time I already have a prototype, so I printed the prototype. So after working with a graphic designer and the testing, we come up and printed like a physical game. So we actually got funded. We've got 158% of funding goal. So obviously there are some other challenges, and the game is the game is the production process is very, very challenging. We can talk about this maybe a bit later, or if anyone have any question on that. So the game I started actually since November 2023, again a game tour, and I tried to engage different universities, and not only to play the game, and also since March this year, I decided to have like a educational survey or the game players' experience. So I hope to collect some more systematic data about this, and hopefully if we all stay within the network, I'll be very, very happy to share this results. Just very briefly, I'll go through. I'm not going to talk about everything, but just want to give you some glimpse of the graphic of the game and the rules. Basically, it's up to 16 players. What is really important, it was really important for me to actually, and which is a lot of people find as an advantage of the game, is that you're not only playing your own character, but you're also the part of the team. So that actually makes this more like a real life political experience, because in politics, politicians have the individual agenda, but they're also, you know, part of bigger teams, whether it's a party, country, or institution, or whatever. It's 70 minutes with 2 possible 10 minutes extension at reputation tokens. As you see, so you take on the roles. We have 5 negotiation rounds, which represents the real-life Brexit negotiation themes: divorce bill, jurisdiction of European Court of Justice, Irish borders, citizen rights, and access to the single market. As you see, we had this little educational brochures, which basically help people to play the game, even if they have zero knowledge about Brexit negotiation. I mean, for me, that was very very important, that the entry point cannot be too high in terms of the pre-existing knowledge. So actually, again, with the testing, with some illustrations, as you see, we decided to have this kind of educational brochures. So you can see this brochures, divorce bill. I particularly like this one. You might recognize who the figures are, but this is about the jurisdiction of European Court of Justice, Irish border, citizen rights, and single markets, famous cherry picking. So these are these are the educational brochures. And at the end you have, and this is about the format of the game, in each of these negotiation rounds you have 3 predetermined options, so you don't create your own solutions. And then as you see, the format is that, and that represents this polarization model, that option 1 represents the interest of the UK, and that gives 1 team point for the UK. And then option 3 is always good for the EU, and that gives a team point to the EU. While option 2 is negative for both. And this, so basically in the negotiation, when you have these 3 options, you negotiate within the team, between 2 teams, UK and the EU. And then you either choose something which is good for the UK or for the EU, or negative for both. And that actually works very well in understanding that the polarization has a very little common ground, and that's actually what polarization brings. That not only had this echo chambers in a political communication, but also politically there is very little which connects this the 2 sides of polarization. Now, also everyone has its own political characters. So you see that everyone has its individual agenda. The stars above, like you see the Chancellor of Germany. So we use the institutions of or countries which were involved in the Brexit negotiations, but these are actually the influence stars. So that makes this more real also, that there are more powerful, less powerful politicians. However, when you have the ratification within the team, there's always, all characters have 20 stars and you need 11 out of 20. So you need a majority to ratify within a team, and both teams have to ratify this separately, the deal. So that actually makes this also very realistic in a sense that even 1 star, so the character with 1 star can be decisive at the end. And that also, if you see these points on the right, these are the points which the character gets when the options listed on the card is within the withdrawal agreement. So this is this individual agenda, right? And here you have with the team, this is a team agenda or team interests, and then you get the separate points for them as a team. So quickly about the game, the course of the game, we have reflection phase and negotiation phase. In a reflection, people discuss, consider options, and present this also on the boards. And the negotiation, we have actually the actual negotiation between the 2 teams. Each team has a leader which decides on the final solutions, but everyone is involved in the negotiations. There are also breaking news cards in the game, so what if events, some sort of alternative scenarios. We have action cards, media campaign, pork barrel, and expertise cards. And then at the end there's ratification. the ratification votes, and both teams have to separate the ratification separately. There's also in the game there also because you have 16 we have 16 characters in the game, but if you want to play the game with a fewer number of people, then you have non-player characters, NPCs, and that's so I'm just letting you know that basically you can play like even with 2 people the game, and then at the end, as I said, there is the game tactic is whether you pursue only your individual agenda, team interest,
Jan,
or
I don't want to hurry you, but I also want to leave enough time. So I wonder if you could wrap up, and we can cover some of the last points also in the questions.
That's actually the end. So
oh, fine. Sorry, I shouldn't have said anything. There we go. Excellent. Amazing. I love the illustrations. They're fantastic. Great. Well, there are lots of points to pick up in the questions, but let's move to Malgorzata for her Monopoly, which you can already see behind her.
Thanks, Katharine. Good afternoon, everyone. So as to the inspiration, actually, inspiration is sitting in front of you. This is Katharine, with whom I had a talk, and she told me about her Snakes and Ladders board game, because I already had an idea to turn one of our seminar in competition law enforcement into a board game, and then I still didn't know how to start, and then Katharine was so nice and so kind to show me her Snakes and Ladders, and that's how the whole idea came out. So I decided to use the board game for the last seminar in the course on European Union competition law. Why on the last? Because this is the procedural seminar, and it's considered to be very boring. Discussing how the procedure looks like, what are the competences of the European Commission, rights of defense, etc. Sometimes, and this is also the end of the term, so students are getting very nervous. Also, they want to start to revise before the exams. So I thought this is a nice way of putting them together, also to recap some points, and also to have a bit of easier and more fancy way of spending seminar together, and that's why I decided to pick up Monopoly. So you can see the board. This is a photo of the board behind me. This, of course, I mean, everyone knows Monopoly, so this is a great advantage of this way of doing it. This is an economic themed board game around the notion of power on the market, around the notion of a monopoly. So already there is the advantage of using it. And also the advantage of using such a well-known game is that it takes very little time to explain it to students. So I told them, look, if you have doubts, please recall how you play Monopoly, and they figure it out very quickly. But of course, it required, as you can see, a bit of arts and crafts. It doesn't look so professional as Jan's. And I think I need to work a bit on this aspect more. And of course, I changed the content of the game to fit the course. So as Katharine mentioned, instead of streets, there were businesses or markets, which reflects the idea of a relevant market under competition law. Also, instead of prison, there is an unexpected inspection from a competition authority, which is called down rate, which slows down, of course, the piece of the game and the team and the person to move forward. Also, there are chess cards and chance cards, as in the real game, but I turned them into questions related to the topic that we were supposed to discuss and that they were supposed to prepare. And there was a possibility to reduce, for example, fines by answering some questions. And if they answered them correctly, they could the amount of fines or the amount of money to be paid, I don't know, the lawyer's fee, for example, was significantly reduced just to make it worth answering this question. If they didn't know how to answer, of course, they were able to use books, but the idea was that they can also help each other. And as they also became a bit competitive, it didn't require much of mine, intervention. What shall we do if someone doesn't answer? Because that was like a waste. But if she doesn't answer, there's no point or no moving forward. So this aspect is also the advantage of using the board game that everyone knows so well. And I think they enjoyed it. At least that was the feedback I received from all of them. It really brought them together. So they were laughing, which, for this kind of topics, I mean, I think I didn't have any seminar on procedure with so many, smiles and nice, relaxed atmosphere. And then at the end we went through all the questions together. So there was a possibility to reflect on the questions and to think, okay, what the correct answer was. What else? Oh, and the final point is that my colleague tested this specific game with Netherlands Authority for Consumers and Markets, and they really liked it. So that was like a big off from my side. So we will use it together in our summer school that we are doing together with them. And now, as I received some extra time and money from our education development fund at UU, I'm right now thinking how to turn it into a bit more professional, and also to make it work and to include maybe merger control, but then I will not bore you probably with those topics. So that's in a big shortcut for me.
Thanks so much. I think it looks brilliant. I don't know if you need to make it look more professional, but it's great that you've got some money to do that. Before we open the questions, I just wanted to, so we heard from a little bit from Jane about getting the designer help, which transformed her game from the drawing to the more professional board. And we heard from Jan about how he did that, and we heard from Gosha about how she wants to do that. Helen, I've seen your game because you so kindly put some copies in the post for me, and it's very professional looking and has these like little goblins, which is amazing. It looks like something you'd buy in the shop. Could you just perhaps say a few words about how you got your idea to looking like that?
Yes, I mean, we had some of the team members who quite enjoyed doing the artwork. Oh, am I still here? I seem to have frozen.
You've frozen, but we can hear you.
Okay, that's great. So we did do the artwork of the actual goblin characters and things. And then we found a company, a small company, that helped us with some of the graphic design and helped us with, making things in a way that was more printable, if that makes sense. So things like the little cards and whatnot. It's interesting because we've now got two experiences, because we did the initial print run with a small company. And then when we needed to make several hundred more, basically the university wanted us to use one of their existing suppliers for procurement reasons. And we've seen some of the advantages and disadvantages with going with a small company. I mean, it sounds like Jane had a similar experience. We found working with a little company who were really lovely about transforming our game and sort of really working with us on a very personal level, but they couldn't help us with things like storage. So we then had the problem of, well, if we're going to have several hundred boxes of games, so enough basically to use with the year cohorts of undergraduates, and we want some to take out and do public engagement with, where are these games going to live? Which sounds a ridiculous problem, but actually it's not a minor thing if you think about 100 of the boxes of the size you saw. Whereas the larger company was able to do things like offer storage and just, send them over when they need them, but the service was much less personal. And it was a very different experience negotiating with them. So, I mean, my recommendation would be, if you can find a local small company of designers and of people who are really enthusiastic about games, at least for the initial getting the concept. Certainly my experience was that worked a heck of a lot better at that stage in the process.
Interesting. I would never have thought about stuff like storage, but great you point it out. I think these 4 games sit really nicely next to each other, and they kind of point out, you know, the difference. I mean, I think that it seems like the learning by stealth is something that runs through all 4 in a way. They're kind of learning through fun, somehow back placing the learning and forefronting fun, but the learning happening anyway. And I think different advantages and disadvantages of like using a game everyone knows versus using a game that needs to be explained have also come through, and we've talked a little bit about different ways of funding, with Jan talking about crowdfunding, kickstarting, and Jane talking and Gosha talking about universities having these funds. We've got 25 minutes left, so I'm going to turn to the people who are taking part online and ask you to stick your hand up if you'd like to ask a question. I think, Lanes, people can turn their microphone on, is that right? If they've got a question. Hi.
Not in this type of meeting, so it would be best if people type in the chat right now.
Okay, great. So if you've got a question, if you could type it in the chat, that would be great. And well, while we're waiting for questions to come in, maybe I could ask just one more question, which is that certainly when I was creating my game, I wasn't thinking very much about game design. I guess that's because I was using a game that exists. But I mean, I know that there are books written out there about game design. And I wondered the extent to which you, and I suppose then I'm looking mainly at people who design their own games. So I'm thinking probably Jan, Jane and Helen, but maybe Gosha, you have something to say too. How much did you teach yourself first about game design, or how much did you just set about to make something in a very instinctive, we think this will work way? Jane, maybe we can start with you.
Bit of a mix of both. I think we all 3 of us are interested in games and played games, more old-fashioned board games and less, you know, perhaps more contemporary gaming type games, but we all had some experience of that, so that was part of it. We did have some kind of meetings. We met with a group of researchers from the art school in Glasgow, which a number of researchers there who have used games and kind of game theory in some of their work. So we met with them. We had a workshop with them quite early on, so we did that. We talked about doing something a bit more kind of proper research into game, but in the end we decided just to kind of trust our instinct a bit, because we were doing it. It was quite simple, and we thought, right, let's just go for it and see what happens, which is what we did. And you know, because it's simple, I think that's been okay. And the feedback from the testing that's happened has been that it works. But for anything more complex, I think we would have needed to do more research for that. So that's our background.
Great, that's useful already. It shows that trusting your instincts can work. Jan, Helen, Gosha, you want to add to that? Helen?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, we very much did it on the basis of just enjoying board games, but not at a sort of serious gamer level, just having happy memories of childhood games. But I have to say, although we did really well when it was commercially trialled, I think that's because we have very patient and forgiving friends and families, and we spent a lot of time persuading people to play it for us when we were developing it. And yeah, so it took time, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Jan?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just going to echo my colleagues. I mean, I did not work specifically at any game design theories or books before, precisely as I said, like I wanted to replicate or any existing gameplays. I just wanted to replicate the dynamic of the Brexit negotiations. So it was more intuitive, and it was more like I first look at the political reality, and then I was trying to see, how out of that I can make specific conditions of Brexit negotiations. And as I said, like the format was already there in a sense. It was set by, like the Article 50, and then the whole negotiations were, in a sense, organized in a way that it was already like when I thought about this first, I was like, yes, this is like a board game. This is a scenario for the board game. But I agree, there are pros and cons for that, because obviously if you go for the game theories, then you're already, in a way, you limit your creativity in a sense. But at the same time, I learned through the process, like, for instance, I added resources, and then I understand while I was testing how important for the players is to have resources and trade resources, which I didn't thought at the beginning. So, which is obviously, I played many board games. I know that in the board games you have resources, you have gold, you have other stuff. You need to have this, and people love that. But then I thought about this while I was testing. So probably it took quite a long time, but it was more intuitive and more based on the reception of people playing and the feedback, because I was also doing the feedback session after. There was always the post-game discussion, but also like a little survey questionnaires. So that would be my advice to anyone. Actually, maybe try from that angle, even if that takes longer time. But definitely, testing the game and patient with testing the game is important. But which is both for the design, but also of the game, but also for the graphics. Like, I think that was also I did not expect before, how a little line here, color here can change people's experience. So testing, if you can allow having several months of testing, you're not under pressure to, like commercial pressure, for instance, then I think it's the best way.
Great. Gosha, do you want to add, or do you want to go to one of these first questions?
No, actually, sorry. I wanted to add that actually this is what I'm right now thinking about, is that I want to stay within the market perspective, but I wanted to step away a bit from to create my own game. There are of course common themes with Monopoly. I mean, this is a market and this is a market. So this is something I'm right now trying to figure out, and probably you need a sparkle, right? You need to find, oh, this is the beginning of the story of the game, because this is like a storytelling, to find the good starting point and then to develop it.
So it seems like everyone's played again and again and again and kind of refined it through playing. So we've got a number of questions. I'm going to read them out. First of all, we have a question from Anka, which is, I think, going to be interesting for Gosha and Jane particularly. Thank you for your presentations, inspiring. May I ask if any of you have experience using games with professional groups? So Jane, your game was made, I think, for, well, I'm not sure professional groups, but you said for members of the public. So we're particularly trying to engage with judges and prosecutors. Could you share more on your strategies and experiences? If you've not, what do you think would be the elements for us to reflect on in order to ensure that they at least try games? Thank you.
Yep, so we engaged with, particularly with lawyers, solicitors, family lawyers. We engaged with marriage celebrants from religious organisations, and also from humanist and non-religious belief organisations. So those were the main professional groups that we've engaged with. Civil registrar, marriage registrars as well, and the response has been really positive. And we, I think, solicitors in particular, what they've said is they would love to go on and work with us in developing another game, which would probably be the game that we're going to have on the flip side of Legally Wed, which is going to be the divorce game. And I think that's where we've had, that's where they think there could be a real, there could be a real opportunity for us to work with them in a way that could develop a game which could be really helpful with how they engage with clients. And even if it's just a way for clients to get a bit of light relief from some of the challenges of going through difficult family situations. So that's been our experience. It's been positive. We have talked with a number of judges about it who are really interested in the idea and interested in it, not perhaps specifically in that game, but in how we can use games in other ways to improve access to justice.
Thanks. Anyone else want to add to that question? Anyone got any advice for Anka on dealing with judges, prosecutors, getting them involved in games? Yes, go Sharon.
Yeah, I didn't witness how the Dutch Competition Authority officials were playing, but the feedback I got via my colleague was very positive. So I think the first tip would be not to be afraid to start playing with them. So really offer them the possibility, and you can be surprised how welcoming they are and how they will find it interesting.
Okay, we've got two more excellent questions. So one's from Sarah Thin. Thank you, everyone. How did you address the issues of providing the game for play by other people without the designer present? Helen, you mentioned this was something you were thinking about. Was it difficult to produce sufficient explanation on paper? And then second question, playtime. Did you try to design a game that would be playable within the time frame of a normal lesson? Was this difficult? Helen, should we start with you, seeing as I know that you've been thinking about the first one in particular?
Yes, I mean, in short, it was a challenge. Not in terms of the mechanics of the game, actually, because the game is quite simple and relatively easy to explain. It's more because we're interested in it being used in schools. And actually, in some of our own public engagement with schools, I was a bit horrified to realise that some of the things that school teachers were teaching children about law was incorrect. From a UK law point of view, for instance, they didn't know that, certain treaties aren't part of domestic law and don't have the same status as the ECHR in the UK and stuff like that. So, yeah, the short answer is it's more just a question of needing to do it in our case. It's not difficult because we're basically paid to teach people about law, but we do actually have to do the work. With regard to the second bit, with our game, it's quite easy because you can just set a time limit and you can say the person who's got the most happiness tokens after X minutes wins. So that's how we fitted it in. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think very helpful. Jan, I know you've been thinking about the game playtime. Maybe you've also been thinking about how to play the game without you being there. I mean,
there's thank you for this question. I think this is a very relevant question because, we're all designers here and we're very attached to this, and we're the source of all the rules and possible exceptions to the rules, which we couldn't think at the beginning. So, for instance, this testing helped me to address in the instruction things which I didn't know at the beginning. So I think that, again, I'll emphasize testing. Yes, but I mean that's the whole that was my whole purpose, actually, to be able to create a game which could be played independently, whether it's a classroom, whether it's a honors program, negotiation club, or any event or team building event or whatever the purpose of that could be. And I think that should be our goal, I would say, in a way, because we can travel, and I travel a lot in the last nearly 3 years, but that will be, I think that's too much of I mean, you have to let, like when we write a book or paper, we just have to let other people take it. And even if they create their own versions of the rules you thought, it's up to them, right?
Yeah.
And I think we shouldn't be, in a way, just afraid of that, even though, we probably, all of us are very, very emotionally close to what we've created. In terms of the normal class, well, yes, it is a challenge, I think, because I think especially when you have the rules, and then if you need to explain some background, obviously that comes really as a challenge. But I also designed separately for the Kickstarter, like a class scenario, which can be done before one class, preparation class, and then if you want to have a follow-up, you can always have like a discussion. But I think, yes, it should be within like 90 minutes in a way. Although, like with the case of my game, I think it's very flexible as long as you keep the general rule of the game that there's a fixed time, and then everyone knows this, and there's the ticking time. So in most of the games, we display the timer, and then people see that time is ticking, because that's also part of the mechanic of the game. But I play this also for like negotiation student clubs, which were like a student association clubs. And then, the session was 3 hours, and, no one felt like it's too long. And, so I guess it's also good to have this kind of flexibility and think about the flexibility of the timing. Because when I had the invitation for the class, it's very, very strict. And then you also, thinking about practicalities, you have to set up. You need like at least 10-15 minutes to set up the room, tables, boards, cards, tokens. And sometimes the classroom is not available before. So you have 15 minutes. And then students are coming in, they start asking questions. Oh, I like this. And how did you come with that? I was like, no, it's my time to set it up. So I think it is a challenge. And so I would encourage more flexibility while designing the game of the time. So it can be within this 90 minutes. Or it can be longer if this is outside the regular class.
Great, thanks, Jan. Yeah, more practical obstacles like the classroom not being available, setting up, explaining. Suddenly you've lost 25 minutes. We've got 2 more great questions. I think we've probably got time to deal with them. So let's. One's from Rebecca, who's here. Hi, Rebecca. So she says, thank you for the great presentations. Could any of the presenters discuss the balance between immersing the players in a narrative world and teaching key rules, issues and topics? Was there ever a trade-off between these different goals? And I'm going to read the next question too, because otherwise I think we risk running out of time. This is from Rengin Tarhan. Tarhan, that may be your first name. It's hard to see on Teams. Such an inspiring collection of board games. I have a question regarding whether you have any concrete assessment tools to measure the educational impact of the game on students. What challenges did you experience in making the game design to ensure it could be effectively integrated into the existing curriculum? So I think I'll just Gosha, we haven't heard from you before. I have a feeling you've definitely thought about the second question, at least. Do you want to say something about either of those 2 questions? I don't know if you have a narrative world, but maybe you do.
I mean, the narrative was already provided, so that was an easy part. And also referring to the first question by Sarah, my board game instruction was 1.5 pages. So really, that was not a very, a rocket science to understand actually what the game is about. The educational aim was, straightforward, was to test the knowledge. So no more sophisticated aims. But it turned out that, for example, the feedback I got from students was that there was no merger control, which was not the topic of the seminar, however, was part of the curriculum of the whole course. So I'm right now thinking how to integrate it as well into the new game that I am developing. Yes, the balance is difficult because my students got very competitive. So it was really like, okay, but you have to pay, or you go bankrupt or whatever. So I was, and for me, of course, it was important that they have fun, but also that they answer the questions, and the time limits were also an important factor, because taking into consideration of what Jan said, so setting up, explaining, it was about 1 hour, 1 hour, 10 minutes of the game, because I really wanted to go through all the questions with them afterwards. So this is also the advantage of such a game as Monopoly. You can stop at any time, and it's very easy to calculate who won or who didn't win, if it's important for students, but also to fill in the teaching goals. And the assessment tools, no, but this is something that I know that our educated department is working on, because this is also part of the project. There will be a follow-up on the assessment. So maybe in a year, I will be able to answer more concretely this one.
Okay, great. Who would like to go next? You can indicate if you, yeah, Helen.
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, the first question really struck me as an excellent question, as in fairness, all of the questions have been. So thank you to everyone, because it's something that we found a little bit, not exactly frustrating, but the narrative world was very important to actually getting the game set up, and you have to have an empathy and an investment. And part of the answer was that we enjoyed it so much that we then ended up making other games of different types, things that have grown out of escape rooms, and a different sort of thing again that's sort of not really an escape room anymore, but the whole thing is an immersive narrative, which we really enjoyed. So it basically was a springboard onto other stuff that I would be happy to talk about at another time. With regard to the assessment tools, mainly the stuff we've done has been in our schools outreach. And it's an informal one, I know, but one of the really gratifying things was seeing a change of perspective, because often, particularly with the younger boys, when they turned around the card, if they'd been given a female goblin, they were very unhappy about that. And, oh no, I'm a girl, that's rubbish. And then in the course of the game, they started to really empathise and care about their goblin. And they also started to realise that's so unfair. So she can't go there or do that just because she's female. That's rubbish. Or they may have used other words. But it was really interesting just listening to their narrative and seeing some attitudinal shift that way.
That is so interesting. Yes, Jane.
Yeah, I don't have so much to say on the second one, the assessment one, because as I said, ours was predominantly not for students. But just on Rebecca's point about the narrative, I mean, I think when we chose weddings and marriage as our topic, we kind of thought this is something that everybody knows about, and they know about it in different ways, even children, or even if they're not married. And that was our experience, that we didn't have to do very much to immerse people or to create the narrative. We tried to provide prompts to a narrative which might develop through our calamity cards, by including just such a wide range of ridiculous things, ridiculous but also very realistic things that might happen in weddings. But what we found really so we focused on the rules and the issues and the legal topics, but what we found really interesting in playing the game and observing others playing a game was how the players created their narrative around the game, and that was really satisfying and very, very interesting to watch. And I remember one example in particular where we were doing it as part of a public engagement event, as a kind of exhibition, and there were a couple of women who were playing the game, and they had their children with them, and the conversations that took place between these two women, one of whom was planning a wedding by wonderful chance, but also between these mothers and their children as they played, was just fascinating, and it brought out so many things. So for us it was slightly different, but the narrative was very much something that was produced by the players as they went along, which was kind of what we wanted to happen. So that was our experience of that one.
That's so interesting, and it sort of reflects a little bit, I think, what Helen was saying about kind of identifying with your character. Jan, you're nodding. Do you want to add to any of this in the last couple of minutes?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing about the second thing about the assessment, I think that this is really important in terms of, as I mentioned, developing the game. And one thing which I also keep still open, even though it's produced and most of the elements are printed like by the professional printing company with the boards and tokens especially. But I think it's also good to have, again, think in advance of some flexibility in terms of like little things, little features, not the major features of the game, little features which can be changed. Because like from my experience, as I said, the assessment, so the survey, which was after the game, was really, really important in terms of assessing students' performance. Like I never envisioned this as a part of like assessment of the course. However, in the game, there is a scoreboard when you can see, like who is the best individually, and as a politician, which team is the best. So in a way, I think points are important in that respect. So I think people still like to win, like in a board game, or still get something. So like in Monopoly, there's a lot of rewards you can get, and I think I think the trick is not to make rewards the major purpose of the game. And I think that's the beauty and the biggest challenge of educational games, that we still offer this, but at the end we have some purpose or message which is different.
Thank you. We're out of time, but this was really great. I learned a lot, and your presentations were excellent. You all four stuck to time and provided such interesting input, which I think was, touching also on the smaller details that I don't think anyone would have thought of. I want to play all four of them. For now, I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for being willing to share your games and taking part. It sounds like at least 3 of you, Jan, you've probably got another game up your sleeve as well. We've got a divorce game coming up. We've got more stuff coming from Helen. Gosha's busy redesigning, so maybe we should see you all again in a year and find out where you got to. But to the people who've attended, also get in touch if you design any games. We'd love to hear. We're building an email list so we can share, if you design a good game. We'll be running another event. We're probably aiming to do about 2 of these a year on something else. So if you've got an idea for a future event relating to games and teaching, let us know. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Lots of thank yous in the chat. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.